Founded in 1982, Adobe Systems Incorporated builds award-winning software solutions for network publishing, including web, print, video, wireless, and broadband applications. Its graphic design, imaging, dynamic media, and authoring tools enable customers to create, manage, and deliver visually rich, reliable content. Headquartered in San Jose, California, Adobe is the second largest PC software company in the United States, with annual revenues exceeding $1.2 billion. Founded in 1982 by John Warnock and Chuck Geschke, who remain co-chairmen of the board, Adobe employs over 3,000 people worldwide.
Adobe has always been a leader in its category. Back in the 80s, it was about leading in desktop publishing. With our products, we're either number one or number two in just about every category in which we participate in. And you could expect us to continue to lead in this whole new era of network publishing. We've been in the publishing business for our entire lives, which is about 19 years, which makes us old in this industry. We know the customers, we know what they're looking for, and we'll continue to provide tools and services to make them successful.
Adobe certainly played a huge role in the desktop revolution. Our strengths really are a tremendous amount of deep technology and passionate individuals who really care about making this reality happen. In addition to that, we have a broad range of products, so we are one of the few companies who can play a pivotal role across all the various different media types that you're talking about, whether it be video, whether it be paper, whether it be images, and we have the breadth of technology to make that happen.
Just about half of our revenue is within the United States, and the rest is in Europe and Asia. So we're not really stuck or tied to one particular country's economic performance for our overall revenue stream. We also have a very diversified customer base. The customer that's in the cross-media space is different than the customer in the web publishing space, which is different than the Acrobat customer, which is in the corporate space. So we're diversified on an end-user standpoint, and we're diversified on a geographic basis.
Good morning, Mr. Geschke. It's our pleasure and an honor to be able to visit with you in your home this morning.
Well, good morning to you, and thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to being able to spend a few minutes with you and talk to your students about some of my experiences.
Thank you so much. Let's start. It sounds like your background is very intriguing, very interesting. If you could tell us briefly about your background and international business experience.
Okay. Well, my educational background is an undergraduate degree in the classics with a master's in mathematics and a PhD in computer science. When I finished my degree in computer science at Carnegie Mellon in the early 70s, I had the opportunity to join the Xerox Research Center in Palo Alto, where so much of what we think of as the modern computer culture was, and engineering designs were actually originally prototyped. And I worked there for a total of 10 years. About a little more than halfway through, I had the opportunity to start a new laboratory, and one of my first tasks was to hire a chief scientist. And I hired a person who became my very good friend and eventually my business partner, John Warnock, to join our laboratory at Xerox, where we were working on graphics, electronic printing, and the ability to sort of bring the printing and publishing industry into the digital age. There have been many stories written about Xerox PARC. It was a very magical place, a tremendous amount of inventiveness going on. But many of us became frustrated because a lot of those inventions were finding their way out into products at companies outside of Xerox. And for a variety of reasons, in the early 80s, in 1982, my partner John and I left Xerox to start our own company, Adobe Systems. And we focused on tools and technology for the printing and publishing industry originally. And because that is a worldwide industry, we knew that to be successful, we were going to have to expand our markets outside of just the United States. And so very early on, we began some licensing arrangements in Europe, and followed quickly by going to Japan, where so much of the technology that underlied modern printing and publishing was being prototyped and manufactured and developed into products. And we began a set of business relationships there that have become a key component of our overall business strategy. And that really led to the expansion of our business on a worldwide basis. Many people of my generation, I was much more exposed to the European cultures than I was to the Asian cultures. So very early on I decided that in order to do business in Asia, number one, it was necessary to have someone who was bilingual and preferably a native be part of our operation before we would attempt to go into those markets, so that we had someone who could introduce us not only to language but also to business culture, because those are very important ingredients. Of course, as our business grew and our predominant development of both our marketing and technology strategies were here still in the United States, we did make a few mistakes in the early days. I remember an example of a trade conference that was being held in Japan where we wanted to show off some of our technology, and we did a poster. And the poster included a facial mask that was done in white. We were very chagrined to discover as soon as we put the poster up at the conference that that was a signal of death and symbolic of death, and so we quickly had to remove it and get rid of that poster. I remember another example where one of our most famous products is a product called Adobe Photoshop. And the icon that's used to represent that typically on the desktop is an icon of an eye. And we introduced a version of the packaging of the product several versions ago. I don't remember exactly the number. And we chose to put a blue eye on the package, only to discover again in Asia that that was symbolic of death and of lack of ill health. And so we quickly had to change that packaging to a different color. So we've made some mistakes of that kind where we haven't paid enough attention to the local culture. We've tried to become much more disciplined about that in terms of reviewing materials and naming of our products and other things, so that we don't cause ourselves those kind of operational and marketing hiccups in those foreign countries. Well, I try, first of all, to understand, if it's a new country, to get some brief reading material, to get a little background on both the history of the country, which is only important as a general background, but more importantly what their current economic condition is and what their interests are in the kind of products and technologies that we offer. I then make sure that whenever I've traveled, I've always taken someone who is close to those markets, someone who is part of our either our sales or our marketing organization who's responsible for that area, who knows the people that I should go to see, knows the publications that I should try and get interviews with, and more importantly understands culturally what are the things I should be sensitized to before I attempt to do either a business interview or a business negotiation in those environments. So that's always been very important. Being a Western company and being a company that's been very focused on hiring the very best talent, many of our senior people have over the years been women. And that was also something that was an eye-opener in Asia. I recall one business negotiation where we showed up with our head of engineering for our Japanese products, who was a woman, a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford, and our lead attorney for negotiating licenses, who was also a woman. And I could see that the Japanese people were caught slightly off guard, and they immediately went out and found a couple of professional women in their staff who could at least participate physically in the meeting, so that they felt there was a balance in the room, something that we would probably not have thought about in the Western cultures. I think one of the very good examples is probably, again, our entry into the Japanese market. As most people are aware of, the Japanese use an ideographic language, a very complex symbolic form of symbols in their language compared to Western languages where we have relatively few letters in our alphabet. And it was pretty clear to us that the first barrier we're going to have to overcome is to build a set of business relationships that would help us understand how to represent quality printing in that environment in a way that the customer would react to the quality. And that was a significant challenge, one that we struggled with for a number of years, and it actually forced us to be very inventive in terms of creating products that could really respond to that market. I'm delighted to say now that we, I think, have achieved a level of quality in that country, or in that marketplace, as well as China, that is comparable to the level that we've achieved in the rest of the Western world. But it took a lot of investment to get to that point. We typically produce our product in about a dozen languages, most of the major European languages, and then in Chinese and Japanese, in fact in both dialects of Chinese, both the Mandarin and, I'm embarrassed for the moment, I can't think of the other, Cantonese languages, so that we can service both Taiwan and the mainland. We've done that principally based on market size. Sometimes we will sub-license our products to third parties to localize them for very specific markets where we think the investment level on our side is not warranted. Well, we work very hard with both the government authorities and the business people, because our attitude about that is that they're not just stealing from Adobe. They're stealing from the entire network of business relationships that we have developed in these countries. The local marketing people, the local distribution channels, the local support environment, and the taxing authority of the government. And so we've tried to build a network of partnerships that help us enforce those laws. And we've been very successful, actually, in the markets that are perceived to be the most open to piracy in some parts of Asia, in getting a sponsorship from that coalition of organizations and mounting anti-piracy campaigns that have been able to produce a good deal more revenue in those markets than we initially thought we could achieve. And so we feel very good about that. You know, it's a thing where going after an individual who has made an illegal copy of something really doesn't make a lot of sense. You want to go after the people who are making a business out of making illegal copies and try and police that. It's still sobering, though, for me occasionally to be approached when I'm walking in a random street somewhere in the world and someone wants to sell me a CD for $5 that has not only all of Adobe's products, but all of Microsoft's and Macromedia's and a whole bunch of other companies' products. And I just realize how much potential revenue is lost to that kind of piracy on a worldwide basis throughout the world, not just in Asia. Well, I think as some of those cultures, particularly in China, where I see a lot of interest in building a software industry, then all of a sudden it's going to become their problem and not just a foreign company's problem.
Not just imports.
Not just imports. And I think that's going to raise, first of all, awareness, which is important. A lot of people don't even in some sense realize that they're stealing or are not educated about the adverse effects of that kind of illegal piracy. And secondly, once they realize that it's part of their industry, I think they'll become much more educated and sensitized to it. We've been very adamant about opening up our hiring policy to independence of not only racial, but also sexual orientation. We have a high percentage of women in our environment. We try to make sure that we are not a sort of classic O-line company. We open ourselves up to the market of the most talented people that we can find. And as an intellectual property business, that's critical, because as I remarked earlier, our only assets are what are in people's brains. And we have to find the most talented people that we can find. The thing I've always tried to instill in people is not a particular denominational religious set of ethics. I believe that most of the world's religions have a common set of principles that are very oriented around trying to provide an ethical basis on which to operate both your personal life and your business life, but rather to translate those into sort of human terms, in terms of how people are to be treated, respected, how you try to understand both the cultural and ethical background of the individual with whom you're dealing, and try to translate that into a common language that you can both use to communicate those principles and values. I found in going around the world that most people at the end of the day really want to do the right thing. And it's just a question of being able to arrive at a common consensus of what that right thing is. And sometimes we in the Western world in particular, because we've been so insulated historically in many cases from those cultures, operate with a lack of knowledge about how principled those people are and how committed they are to trying to be successful in running their own businesses. And I think if we go in with an open mind, we often are much more successful than if we go in with a set of preconceived notions that may in fact be both incorrect and unproductive in terms of how you deal with those people.
So you did not have to make any real significant adjustment when you interact with Buddhist, Muslim, or Hindu business partners or business customers?
I didn't find that necessary. First of all, because I tried to go in with a very neutral position myself, not as something trying to teach them, but trying to understand what I could learn from them and how we and they could be successful together in running an operation. For example, one of our most fastest growing and most productive engineering organizations is in Delhi, India, where we have a group of people who obviously come in general from a very different religious and cultural background than we do in North America, but they have become very much a part of the Adobe team, and they're integrated, and it was a real delight to be able to spend some time with those people and understand how committed they were to a shared set of goals with the rest of the company around the world, and how productive they've been in terms of contributing to the success of our company. Our company was having some very difficult financial problems in terms of our business, and there was an attempt by another company, as often happens, to take our company over, to try and convince people to sell their shares to them so that they could control our business. And I recall going to a major conference here in San Francisco a few weeks after that idea was proposed, and seeing an entire audience of about 1,500 people asked, would you rather see Adobe taken over or Adobe survive on our own? And to a person, everyone in that audience put their hand up and said, we want Adobe. And that said to me that we had not only won their sort of technical relationship and their business relationship, but we had won their hearts. And at the end of the day, that's an important ingredient in any successful business. But what we've tried to do, as I mentioned earlier, is to hire not only exceptionally bright people. Our assumption is that if we go through the effort of recruiting and interviewing, and sometimes the interviews take more than a day, with multiple people being on that interview list before we make a decision, that we've also focused on people who finish. And I think sometimes in the technology business, people don't realize how critically important that is. You've all heard the 90-10, the 80-20 rule about the difference between getting started on something and getting it finished. Believe me, that is a very accurate predictor of a successful company, is whether they can mount the effort to do that last 10, I don't care whether you call it 10 or 20% of the effort to finish. And so one of the things that we have focused on is hiring people who are not just great idea generators, but if they can't finish, then at a minimum we team them up with somebody who's a finisher. And we have the inspirational leader, and we have the finisher who can implement that idea, and we try and support that lack of maybe personality aspect of an individual with the right balancing talent so that we get our products out well executed and on time. Well, I think one of the things that is most important for young people to understand, in fact, for any of us to understand, is that among the most important contributions of the internet has been the globalization of our world. We used to have borders, and those borders were a physical manifestation of the extent of influence of a country or of a culture. But in many respects, those borders from an intellectual point of view have disappeared. And information now is available on a global basis instantaneously in a way that it never has been before. I mean, go back and think about the 15th century when in Western culture, the invention of the printing press had a tremendous impact on not only the education, but the social and political aspects of the world. It really was what enabled the Age of Enlightenment and the change in political systems throughout the Western world, as well as the world in general. The internet is going to do that on a worldwide, multicultural, multi-political way that we've never experienced before. And it's absolutely critical when you think about your participation not only in the business world but in society, that you take advantage of that to educate yourself about the breadth and scope and opportunity on a global basis. It's the only way I think you can think about being successful in the 21st century. I think particularly because the people I'm talking to are primarily students, you should realize that whenever you get your degree, it's not the end of your education. It's just one important step, one important benchmark, and that you should invest in your own personal education for the rest of your life. The day you stop learning is the day you stop being a really creative contributor, not only to your own happiness, but to the success of the business and of the culture in which you reside. And I would encourage all of your students to use the tools of the internet, their relationships with the universities and schools that they've been participants in, to continue the process of lifelong learning. That's where you get your primary satisfaction. And if you want to talk about a competitive edge for an individual, it's what you've learned, what you've been educated to do that no one can ever take away from you. And that's the ultimate investment in yourself, your own happiness, your own success.